Greetings, everybody. It's Jim. When it comes down to your favorite war game, sooner or later you're going to want to make up your own scenario, right? I mean, you've played through the entire scenario book. I mean, you played it through, and now you have the gumption to create your own scenario. And I'm here to tell you, not only can you should. All right. After all, if you've gone through the entire scenario book, you're pretty much an expert on the game. You should make a scenario. I'd love to see it, right? And it's a part of pride for you too. And I can tell you though, after making a few scenarios myself, after a few decades of playing games, there are a few pitfalls that I think I can help you avoid. So today I'm going to be talking to you about the basics of scenario design and some pitfalls to avoid. And yes, as you can see there, that is in the background, Steve Jackson Games Ogre. I do plan on making a video for that sooner or later. Now, for the purposes of this video, I am talking about all wargaming, okay, from the historical accurate games like Advanced Squad Leader, Panzer General, or even Columbia Games' Gettysburg, as well as the fictional games such as Warhammer 40K, BattleTech, Steve Jackson Games Ogre, anything that plays with a scenario, okay, that has different scenarios involved with wargaming. All right, so the first thing that we want to talk about is what is the scenario's purpose? Now, the purpose is not like the objective, is not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about a polar opposite ends here. Is it an excuse to play, or are you trying to get historically accurate? All right, let's start with historical accuracy first, because this is where most historical war gamers lie. However, it doesn't necessarily mean historical accuracy as far as our universe goes or our real world. It could mean BattleTech, 40K. They have rich histories. And so these could actually mean this for these guys too. So most scenarios, when they recreate a battle, they take two steps back and they say, okay, here's your forces. Do with them what you will, and see what happens. Okay, that's the whole idea. That's kind of the draw for most people. What would I do if I was in charge of the Battle of Gettysburg, right? But the thing is, when you go down the rabbit hole further, some people actually make it more towards a simulation. Okay, where they say, here's your exact forces in the exact same spot, the exact same day, exact same time, exact same commanders, go. Right? So some people would say, what's the purpose of that? Right? You're just recreating the entire thing. Well, yeah, people recreate battles, right? And the Civil War reenactors and stuff like that. What they want to see here in the game, though, is they're trying to say, hey, 9 times out of 10, would this battle have been won? Or they want to see the exact same battle, but they want to see little parts of minutia and how that would have shaped everything. Would that have changed anything? In other words, you start the battle as before, the exact same way, and then when the forces engage, the dice change the battle, okay? Oh, they didn't take that hill after all. Oh, those forces didn't get there to relieve those guys in time. Now what happens? That's what they get into. Now, the thing is, when you get into minutia like that, you're really narrowing the number of people that might be interested in playing your scenario down, which just doesn't mean anything. If you're making a scenario the way you want to make it, you do it. Okay, but that's something to consider if you really want more people to play. And, Steve Jackson goes into that into his book, Theory and Practice of Game Design. He used to battle with his boss at Metagaming all the time about playability. Okay, he'd just say, look, that's a really cool bit of minutia there, but I mean, is it really cool enough to add an hour's worth of gameplay? And those are things that you're going to have to think about if you're going in that direction. Another example is, here's Tom and Grant Dalgleish. They're right now playtesting their Napoleonic era game Alliance. Okay, and they're fighting for historical accuracy too, because this is what they do, but they got to have that playability in there to make it a game. And one of the things they're trying to figure out is how many players is this really going to meet comfortably. They originally were trying to do a 6-player game, but they're veering more towards 3 now, because if they're trying to be so historically accurate, well, certain factions are not going to be involved right away. And with 3 players, that's not so bad, because if this faction's not active, well, this one is, right? While if you're playing 6, there's some people are going to be sitting around for an hour sitting on their thumbs, right? And so that's no fun. So they got to really be careful of that. And they're experts at what they do, though, so I know they're going to make the right decision. So that's what I'm talking about there. Now, an excuse to play a side of the line basically comes down to things like BattleTech and Ogre, where you get so many points worth of forces. Okay, choose your forces, and you put them out there, and they choose an equal amount of forces. They put them out there. Bam! Here's a random map board. Here's a random objective. Go. right? And that could be a lot of fun. That's what it's an excuse to play. It's really not a historical accurate scenario. It may not even be balanced really, even though for those games that I mentioned, I would say the point values are very, very accurate. It's been played numerous times and definitely play tested as far as accuracy, while other games I wouldn't give that balance to, and you got to really worry about it. So when you play your game, if it's like Battletech or it's been played and play tested and play tested and play tested, and those numbers are probably pretty accurate, you can go with that. But if it's a newer game, beware of that, especially if it's one of those games with a lot of factions, because Force A can beat Force B easily. I mean, no, it's equal, but Force B can beat Force C equally. I mean, A can beat B, B can beat C, C, however, can beat A. Right, so when A and B beat, it's kind of like they can womp them, but all of a sudden C can womp these guys. So giving somebody the same amount of points may not be totally accurate. Sorry, I kind of was getting into that a little bit there, but that's a big thing. And I guess that takes us right into the next point here is force pool. So because it's kind of the same idea. How many units do you give aside? And what do you give them a complete choice? I would suggest really veering not to do that in most scenarios, because in most scenarios there's always going to be forces that or units that are really going to overpower most everything else. Okay, this happens more along the lines of the fiction games. I could think of some like Silent Death from Iron Crown Enterprises in the 90s. Maybe Battletech and Ogre can have that happen if you're not careful. Depending on the scenario. Some scenarios, some units just may run a board better. If you say you can pick from anything, you're going to run into a problem. So you really want to limit their amount of forces, or not have them available at all and make it really interesting. Okay, most battles are won with I shouldn't say uninteresting forces, but not non-optimal forces. That's a more interesting battle all the time. Everything else turns into attrition. If they play with the perfect amount of units and these guys play with the perfect amount of units, it's a pre-done battle. And if they play it again, they're going to pick the exact same thing. That's no fun. So force them to have a little bit of variety in there, shake things up. That's a big deal. Another thing is having too many units on the board. It's always tempting to have a lot of units on a board, a lot of action, right? The big game. And I'm not saying I wouldn't do that for fun. I mean, I've participated in a 500 spaceship battle at Origins, and then next year I did 1,000, right? With a whole bunch of people. It was a lot of fun. It was a cool event, but really it just came down to work, right? Because that's what all those battles feel like. You're just going through the motions. There's no strategy, just paperwork. You're just going through it. And the only time that it really gets interesting is once everything's whittled down and it becomes, okay, what's left over? The scraps, right? And then there's a story involved. And if you do want to play a battle like that, you don't necessarily have to have so many forces to go through that attrition. Maybe give them, 3 or 4 units more than normal. I mean, I'm talking like, okay, I should say 25% more than normal. So there's a little bit of attrition there. So there's a little bit of ground and pound, and then it creates a story of its own. That would be good. Okay. But having a whole bunch there and just have them going through there for hours on end, unless you're at Gen Con just doing some kind of special, hey, wahoo event, you gotta have to watch out for that one, because that one, dragging things down. The most interesting battles I've ever played are actually with less pieces on the board. You're thinking from turn one, that's very important. Now, this last part I'm going to talk about, I was actually quite proud of. It's called Running It Twice, and it came from my Ascension to the Galaxy spaceship combat game. Of course, it can be used for historical games as well as any fictional game. It doesn't matter. Matter of fact, I'm going to show you how I use it for Columbia Games' Victory in a little bit. But the game, the idea came about because in Ascension to the Galaxy, like I just talked to you about force pools, there were 6 different races, and I could not balance them with a point value system. They were just all over the place, and there was no way to make it fair, so I dropped it. It had to happen. But the problem is, now what do I do with my scenarios? Am I actually going to have to, because I wanted all these races to interact with each other. I wanted it to really be an excuse to play game, not a simulationist thing where everything's stuck, but that's the way it would have to be. I would have to actually say race A here has 5 ships, race A here has 6 ships. I'd have to play test it like 2 dozen times and then kind of get an idea if that was balanced or not. And I would have to do that. And that would lock that in for those 2 races. But I would have to make one for every other race. And what about the situations? I actually wanted to have a list of situations and have every race be able to play in them. And I wouldn't be able to do that. Not for years. You know, it was terrible. So what to do? And then all of a sudden it hit me like a ton of bricks out of lightning, out of nowhere. You know, why not run it twice? In other words, I have a scenario. Race A has 5 ships. Race B has 7 ships. Is it totally balanced? I don't think it's overly unbalanced, but it's horseshoe length. You know, it's like throwing horseshoes. I'm not throwing a fine dart. I'm throwing a horseshoe. So yeah, it's close enough to be interesting. So what would happen is you play it, you figure out the victory points, then you just simply switch sides and you play it again. And the player that does better wins. It's as simple as that. And that made it so any race can play. It didn't matter in the race composition. You guys could decide what ships to put on the board and where and stuff like that. You just remember where they're at. You play the game and you switch sides. Simple. I'm going to show you how I do that in Victory here from Columbia Games. Here's Victory. You don't have to understand what the game is, but basically... you know, what happens here, this is a D-Day scenario, and, you know, blue's invading red, and blue's going to get in, you know, no matter what, pretty much here, okay? But it depends, it's called deep territory, and the idea is how far inland you go, okay? The points of the values of the cities go up exponentially as you go forward, all right? But basically, I had play tested this enough that I know that I got personally 9 points every time I played, on average. Now, mind you, that's just with me and my playtesters, and that's kind of a smaller group, right? It's more efficient to just release this and say, look, play this with your friend. How many points did you get? Switch sides. How many points did he get? Or you can even play this solitaire a few times. It doesn't matter. It makes it a lot easier. Now, after a year, I'm going to get a feedback from a lot of other people and tell me what the average is. And it seems like if as long as it's not all over the place, I could take those averages and say, okay, blue wins if they score this many points. And then it will be a normal scenario. So as you can see, doing it the easier way first, you don't have to get so tight with it at first. With the let it ride, run it twice thing, it allows you to be more efficient in your game scenario design. So the last thing I'm going to tell you about is about efficiency. Basically, when it comes to creating your scenario, treat it like free writers do. When they're, you know, writers have this thing called free writing. They just do it. They just write it. No editing, nothing, no periods. You don't stop. You just go brrr on the keyboard. Do that with this. I mean, you got an idea of where to go. Get things down. Start being creative. Put things there. Don't worry about being perfect the first time around. You are an expert at your game by now, I'm assuming, because like I said, you've probably gone through that scenario book. So you already know what probably is balanced and unbalanced. You might be surprised a little bit, but that's okay, because if you use the run it twice aspect of it, it won't matter too much as long as it's not overdone. I really encourage you to make your next scenario. Hopefully I'll see all kinds of scenarios for all kinds of games in the future. And hey, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next video.